Shalom, everyone. Welcome to lesson number 3 of our series of lectures titled Perfect Harmony, the Torah Blueprint for Humanity's Partnership with HaShem in the Scientific Age. My email appears below. I'll be happy to hear your comments, questions, whatever you would like to share with me. I strongly suggest to follow these lectures in the order that they appear, since each lesson builds upon the previous material that we discussed. So these are the lofty goals that we would like to reach in these lessons, and these are the tools at our disposal. We spent some time explaining the modern scientific method that emerged in the 17th century and changed the course of humanity. For the first time, humanity has developed a robust, foolproof system for studying nature. For those of you who are not familiar with this process, please go back to our previous lesson. It is necessary to understand the ramifications of this momentous historical development, since for the first time in history, humanity reached an intellectual level that allows us to understand physical reality on an unprecedented level. The modern scientific method replaced the previous pseudo-scientific method, which was based on philosophy and not experimental proof. You may ask, what does this have to do with our subject, which is understanding our relationship with HaShem? Well, with these intellectual and scientific tools in place, people began taking a hard look at religion, asking challenging questions and expecting clear answers. If asking good questions can lead to scientific breakthroughs, it would seem that asking good questions should also lead to breakthroughs in understanding religious belief. As one well-known scientist argued, if in the past there were many idols, which were then reduced to one God by the Jewish religion, why not just reduce it by one more and have 0 gods? Going on with our recap of the previous lesson, we then introduced Rambam's principle for understanding the Torah and Hashem's messages to humanity. According to this principle, we must look at 3 things which are interconnected, like the vertices of a triangle: the Torah text that we are studying, the explanations of the oral Torah, including principles of faith, and the explanations of Torah scholars, and number 3, proven principles of science that are relevant for the Torah and the text, for the text under study. Finally, in our last lesson, we started looking into one issue where the Rambam applied this principle, which is the issue of God personification. What does this mean? There are many instances in the Torah where Hashem is described with human attributes, such as speaking, doing, hearing, smelling, having an arm and leg, and so on. Now, this is in direct contradiction with the Jewish belief principle that Hashem is not composed of matter. We will get back to this example later and also look at other examples. But first, let's take a closer look at Rambam's triangle, the tripartite principle. Let's rephrase the 3 tasks at the vertices of this triangle as follows. On the upper right, the Torah text under study. The Torah was given to us by Hashem. It conveys his messages on many levels, much like the structure of an onion, which is composed of many layers. The deeper ones hidden below the surface layer. After first gaining a relatively simple surface level understanding of the Torah, we are called to peel away the upper layer and begin to reveal the deeper levels, the deeper messages of the Torah. How do we go about this task? Well, let's now look at the upper left vertex, which we rephrased as, we apply our intellectual capability following set rules of the oral Torah to study the Torah's messages. So together with the written text, we received the oral Torah, which teaches us the rules for interpreting the written Torah, and of course leads to the fundamental principles of Jewish faith in HaShem. The nation of Israel that received the Torah is called upon to use these rules of the oral Torah in order to study and reveal the messages of the written Torah, the upper layers of the written Torah, as well as the deeper levels of understanding of the written Torah. Now, let's look at the bottom vertex, which in the Middle Ages was not obvious to most people, but was very obvious to the Rambam, to be a necessary step in understanding Hashem's messages. It says, we apply our intellectual capability following set rules of the scientific method to study the physical laws of nature. Now, when we compare this with the upper left phrase, we see that all we did was replace the words oral Torah with the scientific method, and replace the words the Torah messages with the physical laws of nature. So this bottom vertex is basically an instruction for all of humanity, which was blessed with intellectual capabilities not shared by other living things, to strive to understand Hashem's wishes and goals for his creation. This can be done by studying Hashem's creation and then perceiving Hashem's master plan for his creation. Let's do one more thing. So here are our three tasks at hand, which form the three corners of the triangle and are interconnected in the way that the Rambam explained. The upper two-way arrow represents the ongoing study and development of the oral Torah as a means for understanding the written Torah. This means that there is a partnership between the nation of Israel and Hashem in constant development and uncovering the messages of Hashem as they are written in the Torah. This can be summarized as follows. We are partners with Hashem in the creation process by actively engaging in understanding and benefiting from the spiritual framework of the creation. But we're not done yet. Let's look at the other two sides of the triangle, which connect the Torah to physical reality. This connection is also due to a partnership between Hashem and humanity. We can summarize this as follows. We are partners with Hashem in the creation process by actively engaging in understanding and benefiting from the physical framework of the creation. Note that all we did is to replace the word spiritual framework with the word physical framework. Now, let's look at these two statements again. Here they are. So I think that we are beginning to understand one of the fundamental messages of the Torah. The creation is one. There is a oneness in Hashem's creation. The physical creation and spiritual creation are two sides of the same coin, as they must be, since they are the product of the ultimate oneness, which is HaShem. Both sides of the coin are needed, otherwise the coin cannot exist. The Torah relays HaShem's messages in parallel in both the physical and spiritual realms. It must be this way, since both realms are HaShem's creations, and they are in perfect harmony with each other. This will become increasingly clear as we dig deeper into the Torah's messages for humanity. All of the creation is singing praises to HaShem, as is written in the book of Psalms, Tehillim. Because all of the creation, the physical as well as spiritual, are in perfect harmony. Now, if we overemphasize the importance of the physical reality and minimize or even cast aside the spiritual reality, so to speak, we are distorting HaShem's master plan. The same occurs if we overemphasize the importance of spiritual reality and minimize or cast aside the physical aspects of reality. Being the special creatures that we are, created in God's image, we have the intellectual and emotional capability to be HaShem's partners in His creation. Now let's go back to where we left off in the previous lesson. There are many examples in the Torah where HaShem is described with human traits. Here, for example, are 5 verses, the Hebrew and English, that I took from the first chapter of Genesis, where HaShem is described as speaking, seeing, calling by name, making. In other places in the Torah, He is described with other attributes. So here is Rambam's triangle for this issue of personification of HaShem. The Rambam did not suffice with the principle of faith, which is very clear on this issue. HaShem is not human, nor is He corporeal. He is not composed of matter. As we explained earlier, the Rambam looked at the established scientific facts, which in his time were based on philosophy, and closed the triangle by pointing to the philosophical proof that supports the principle of faith. However, the modern scientific method does not regard philosophical arguments to be valid proof. So today we do not have a triangle. The bottom vertex is erased. So this leaves us, or still left with the question, as to why the Torah describes HaShem having human attributes, which is a direct contradiction of the fundamental Jewish belief that HaShem is incorporeal. He is not composed of matter. Dear listeners, the answer is clear and actually staring us in the face. All that is required is to look carefully again at the Torah text. Here again, I put some verses from the first chapter of Genesis, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 16th, and 17th. We see that the Torah using words to describe Hashem's actions with human-like descriptions. I marked them in red. Please note that these descriptions precede the appearance of man, of humanity, which emerges only in the 6th day of the creation. By the way, I would just like to remark that later on we will explain what the Torah means by day when describing the 6 days of creation. It is certainly not a 24-hour day, but more on this later. Now, moving on to the 2nd chapter of Genesis, this continues with more human-like descriptions of Hashem's actions. Note that only in the verse 20 of the 2nd chapter of Genesis, this is marked in green, does man begin to act, and only here does the Torah begin to describe his actions with human descriptions. The man named, the man did not find, and so on, as we read on. Now, us human beings are used to using words that have day-to-day meanings, and we assume that these are the meanings of these words when they appear in the Torah. However, this assumption is totally wrong. The Torah introduced these words and their true meanings long before humans adopted this language, with their mundane day-to-day meanings. So in essence, we conclude that these descriptions of Hashem's actions, which appeared long before the appearance of humans with their physical traits, have a much deeper meaning, much more fundamental than the superficial, simple messages that are usually understood from everyday phrases that we use, like she said, he called, or they made, which in everyday speech we take on their face value. We conclude that the text of the Torah should not always be understood only on a simple level. Our sages teach us that the Torah was in place long before the appearance of humans, and even long before the creation itself. So let me stress again, the true deep messages of these words were established long before humans appeared on the scene and used these words to describe mundane human actions. So here is a rule for studying the Torah texts. The first appearance of any specific word in the Torah is the place where we should study this word in its Torah context and understand the deepest messages that this word is conveying. For example, let's go back to the first verses of Genesis chapter 1. God said, God saw, God called. Let's ask the following question. To whom did God say what he said, or called what he called? Who was there to listen besides Hashem himself? Our sages teach us that these actions are not to be taken on a simple, superficial human understanding. The Torah description, saying, calling, seeing, and so on, have much deeper meanings and get to the essence of Hashem's master plan for his creation. We will return to this important topic later on, but so as not to leave you hanging, let's take as an example verse 5. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And it was evening, and it was morning one day. Our sages explain that already at the initial stage of the creation, the potential for everything to form the way we see it today was already in place. However, this formation took place in stages. So, for example, light initially was not a separate entity. At some point, it was Hashem's will, built into the creation process, that light emerge and take on its own form. This process, whereby the various pieces of the creation begin to emerge as separate entities, is described in the Torah as calling it by a name. So the verse 5, and God called the light day, the darkness he called night, really means on the Torah deep level that at some point light took on its own form and characteristics. The Torah describes this process by calling the light by the name day. Again, as an aside, I would like to remark that day in this verse cannot mean the simple physical daytime or 24-hour period that we use today, since this verse describes an event that occurred long before the sun, moon, and other celestial bodies were in place. Okay, I know that this requires a lot more explanation, but I hope you get the gist of it. In our future lessons, we will go through the verses of these chapters and explain everything slowly and carefully. I promise you that it will be an interesting and fascinating journey. Bye for now. Shalom, shalom.